time you're going to attempt time travel.
No one outside of Hollywood has made a working time machine, just yet. But surprisingly, time travel might be possible.
Now boarding Flight 24 to Black Hole Cygnus X1.
One way to travel through time is to make use of a strange feature of gravity. The familiar force that keeps our feet planted to the ground can have a profound impact on time. Hi.
See you later, sir.
Right. Much later. So, how can gravity be used to make a time machine? Well, Einstein's theories show that gravity, like motion, can affect time. It's as if gravity can pull on time, slowing its passage. And the stronger the gravitational pull, the more time slows. Here on Earth, the effect is too small to notice, but still very real. Compared to someone living on the top floor of a skyscraper, someone living on the bottom experiences time elapsing a little slower because gravity is just a tiny bit stronger closer to the ground. But if you could travel to a black hole, the effect of gravity on time would be huge. Formed when large stars collapse in on themselves, black holes have immense gravitational pull, millions and even billions of times stronger than the Earth's. And if someone wants you to travel close to a black hole, they see time for you slow down dramatically.
You near that black hole will appear to your friend far away to be moving slowly, talking slowly, biologically, aging slowly. To them, years are passing, while for you it might be minutes.
So, depending on the black hole size and how close I get, if I spend an hour or two in orbit, something like 50 years will have passed back on Earth. I will have traveled to Earth's future.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
Long time no see. Time travel becomes you.
Thank you. Kind of like a fountain of youth.
So we definitely invite anybody who has any questions to step up to the mic, and we'll let you ask. If there are, I see somebody there.
Hello. Einstein's theory of relativity has a huge impact on everything, but if CERN's assertion that a particle did actually go faster than the speed of light, if that is proven to be true, what impact does that have on Einstein's theory of relativity and then on our understanding of time, etc.?
Yeah, so many of you no doubt have heard about this recent result that neutrinos were fired from CERN in Geneva, Switzerland, through the Earth to Gran Sasso in Italy, and apparently arrived 60 nanoseconds before they should have. That is, 60 nanoseconds before a corresponding beam of light would have arrived traveling the same distance, which suggests that these neutrinos may be traveling faster than the speed of light. Now, that's an odd-sounding phrase to most of us who've grown up on the idea that Einstein gave us, that nothing can go faster than the speed of light. And were it to be true, which is your question, it would be a revolution. It would stand outside of Einstein's theories, suggesting that his theories, which we believe for other reasons, have a limited domain of applicability. And we'd have to figure out what the correct, more accurate laws that allowed us to describe the motion of neutrinos accurately would be. Before we jump to any of those conclusions, though, that we'd have to give up Einstein, I would say that I would bet anything that I hold dear.
Anything?
Well, not this little guy over here, I guess. Most anything that I hold dear, that these results will not stand up to further scrutiny. if they did, and that's the huge if, the underscored if, yes, we have known for a long time that if something could travel faster than the speed of light through space, then that would suggest that you could send signals to the past, that you could, in principle, travel to the past. If I had a neutrino gun that indeed could fire a particle faster than the speed of light, and I fired it at you, you get hit by the neutrino before I pulled the trigger. That's weird. And that's why we suspect these results won't hold up to further scrutiny, but if they did, it would be thrilling. It would be spectacular.
All right, thank you.
Hi, I'm particularly looking forward to the multiverse episode. I was wondering if you could comment on the different ideas of way multiverses could exist that will be in the episode, and which you find particularly, or at least more or less reasonable.
Sure.
Should we hold the multiverse answers until we watch the clip so the other people?
Yeah, we could do that. We could do that, sure. But we'll come back. I'll definitely remember to address that at the end.
Thank you.
Hi, I may not look like it, but I'm a senior physics major at Rutgers University.
Surprisingly, you do.
I'm actually applying to grad schools, and I took today off of applying to grad schools to go to this, so I'm very happy I saw you. So one of the string theorists, one of the graduate students in my program, was discussing some string theory with me after I read your book, Elegant Universe, which I'm sure a few people here, many people have read. So you suggest that, you say that it's based off, you found the spin-2 massless particle, the graviton, and solving the equations of motion for such yielded gravity. And that's basically, oh great, we just unified quantum chromodynamics, quantum electrodynamics, you know, the weak force and obviously gravity. He told me that gravity was not a dynamic element of string theory. And I just wanted to discuss that with you. I'm very naive about this, so.
Yeah, he's wrong.
He's wrong.
Would you like to discuss it further?
If you would have any inclination as to why he would think that.
Yes, I think I know what he's referring to.
Okay.
And just in a quick nutshell, just to bring everybody up to the same place, string theory is a hypothetical theory that I work on, as do many others, and it was the subject of the Elegant Universe book and television show. And one of its claims to fame is that it is meant to unite gravity and quantum mechanics, a goal that we've had for many years and have had a great difficulty achieving. So on paper, at least, string theory seems to do that. Now, gravity in string theory is absolutely a dynamical feature. You absolutely have gravitational fields that can change in time. That's what dynamics is, something that can change, can evolve in time. But what your friend no doubt is referring to is when we do our calculations in string theory, we do assume a pre-existing space and time and then look at small fluctuations, small undulations about it. And that's called a background-dependent approach to putting gravity and quantum mechanics together, which has been one of the main reasons why certain people have criticized string theory. So if you followed some of the criticisms of string theory, which I find a little bit odd because all those criticisms are in the Elegant Universe. It's not like this is new ideas that it hasn't been tested. And so, but one of the criticisms is that it does need to assume a pre-existing space and time, which someone would say perhaps is a non-dynamical since it's pre-existing, but that is really an incorrect description because we can modify the background. We can allow it to undulate, so it does have a dynamics associated with it, even though we need to assume a pre-existing one to get the ball rolling. So I think that's probably what your friend is referring to.
I'm okay with that.
Great.
Thank you very much.
I think we have to screen out the physics majors for now. Let's do one more and then show the quantum.
Sure.
You know how you were talking about with black holes, you could, if you orbit them, make large distances forward in time? Well, how would you make large distances backwards in time?
That's a great question. So we spoke in the clip about traveling to the future. What about traveling to the past? And had we not hit the stop button, the show goes on to address that very question, namely, can you travel back? And one way that it might be possible, and this is definitely more hypothetical than what we were describing with traveling to the future, You could build a ship, you go to a black hole, you will travel to the future. There's no controversy about that whatsoever in the physics community. But to travel back, we make use of something called a wormhole that no doubt you are familiar with from Deep Space Nine and things of that sort, which is basically a tunnel that is not just a tunnel from one place in space to another place in space, but it's a tunnel from one moment in time to a different moment in time. And if wormholes did exist, and could they be kept open, and could you manipulate the openings, move them relative to one another, then it's pretty clear that you would be able to set up the situation where you enter the wormhole at one moment in time and one point in space, and you exit at a different location both in space and in time, which could be in the past. So that's the basic idea that we describe in the program, and it's probably the most believable or the most promising approach that's on the table in the physics community as well.
Thank you. So, you want to give a brief intro on entanglement, and we'll show the quantum?
Yes, so one of the other shows that we mentioned is on quantum mechanics, and to many people's thinking, the strangest part of quantum mechanics is not the stuff that perhaps is most readily found in popularizations, things like quantum tunneling, which is the capacity to travel through solid objects, that the world is based on probability. These are all strange and wondrous ideas, but the weirdest element of quantum mechanics of all is something called entanglement. And I don't know, how many people know about quantum entanglement? Oh, more than half of you, I'd say, which is great. So, actually, someone who just raised their hand, why don't you just come up and just take over this part of the... Now, quantum entanglement is hard to describe, and it's weird. It's the idea... you want to come up. Which is that... my son, 6-year-old. That what you do in one part of the universe can affect something in a distant part of the universe. That's weird. Normally, if I hit this guy over here, none of you are feeling it. But according to quantum mechanics, there is a way in which I could hit this guy in the arm and one of you would go, ouch.
Collapsing matrix connection.
This, again, was so weird that Einstein didn't believe it. He thought this was a clear indicator that quantum mechanics was either wrong or incomplete, needed something else. But experiments since Einstein passed on have established that entanglement is real.
Process
and in this clip, we're talking about how entanglement is used to do teleportation. Am I right? Yeah. So the question is, if I can hit this guy over here and one of you goes, ouch, can we make use of that to do something interesting or weird or useful? And we describe here how this notion that you all are familiar with from Star Trek of teleportation, taking an object in one place and making it appear somewhere else, that entanglement can make that possible, at least in principle. And we don't describe it in this clip, but we do in the lead up to this clip describe how there are real experiments happening right now today where particles are being teleported from one location to another. So in this clip, we take that one step further and discuss what it would mean if you could apply that not to particles, but to people.
3 quantum leap.
Welcome to New York City.
Let's say I want to get to Paris for a quick lunch. Well, in theory, entanglement might someday make that possible. Here's what I need. A chamber of particles here in New York that's entangled with another chamber of particles in Paris.
Right this way, Mr. Greene.
I would step into a pod that acts sort of like a scanner or a fax machine. While the device scans the huge number of particles in my body, more particles than there are stars in the observable universe, it's jointly scanning the particles in the other chamber, and it creates a list that compares the quantum state of the two sets of particles. And here's where entanglement comes in. Because of spooky action at a distance, that list also reveals how the original state of my particles is related to the state of the particles in Paris.
Matrix hologram.
Next, the operator sends that list to Paris. There, they use the data to reconstruct the exact quantum state of every single one of my particles. And a new me materializes. It's not that the particles traveled from New York to Paris. It's that entanglement allows my quantum state to be extracted in New York and reconstituted in Paris, down to the last particle.
Bonjour, Monsieur Greene.
Hi there. So, here I am in Paris, an exact replica of myself. And I better be, because measuring the quantum state of all my particles in New York has destroyed the original me.
So I think that's a real good example of what we were talking about earlier, where ideas in science fiction, which come out of people's imagination, sometimes do have this wonderful way of intersecting with developments in science that shockingly put them on solid footing. So it's not as though we can do that today, obviously, but the fact of the matter is we can do that with individual particles. There are experiments that we describe in the program happening in the Canary Islands, where particles, photons, are teleported from one of the islands in the Canary Islands, La Palma, to the island of Tenerife, 89 miles away. One particle starts here, and an exact version of it winds up over there. So scaling that up, this is the kind of thing that, at least in the most wild imagination that pushes the science forward, you can imagine one day happening.
So I invite people up for questions if they have any, and I'll ask a brief question to kick things off. Is that question of, is the person that steps out the other side, is it a duplicate, or is it the original, or is there a difference?
Well, it's a very important and difficult question, because if the particles, as we describe in this little clip, are not truly moved from New York to Paris, if the particles that make me up are not moved from New York to Paris, but rather the information those particles contain is somehow extracted in one place and used to reconstitute a collection of particles in exactly the same state as my particles in New York, is that really me? And most of us would say, yes, it really is you. Because as we describe in the program, when you really take quantum mechanics on board, what makes me me is not the actual particles that are constituting my bones and my brain and everything else inside of me. It's really the quantum information that those particles contain. And this protocol, this ability to take information from one place and move it to another place, would say that all of the relevant data that makes me me is moved to Paris. It's just not the actual substrate that supports that data. So most of us would say yes. And the final thing, which is the kicker, is when I step into that machine, as we described, the act of measuring me in the manner that's required for teleportation destroys me. There is no other version of me that you could point to as who I am after this process takes place. So the one that steps out in Paris in this scenario is the only version of me that exists. So I think the answer is yes, but there would be a certain anxiety and reluctance to step into this machine.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say I'm an experimentalist, and I would take the other side of the neutrino bet. But what I want to ask about is, yeah, there you go. What I want to ask about, we'll be here next year. If he's wrong, there you go. What I want to ask about is actually sort of educational philosophy with this, with these wonderful, compelling, fun visuals. It seems to me there could be a couple of things that you're trying to do. One is get people excited and inspired and want to watch, and the other is to help them understand it better through the videos, through the visuals. And I was curious what you see as the balance between those two things as you do this.
Well, I mean, Jonathan might be able to speak to this too, but certainly both of those are the goals. We do want to excite people about science, and we want what happens in that process for people to learn about these wondrous ideas. At some points, there is a tension between wanting to cover the science more fully, more deeply, versus the worry that that then takes it too far outside of an interesting, compelling, entertaining environment and makes it feel too much for an audience to take in. And this is a conversation that we had about 10,000 times during the making of this program, where typically, I want to push more for the detail of the science, and others, Jonathan and Joe and the others on the team, saying, no, it's just too much. And almost always they're right, because almost always they let us do a version where it's a little bit more detail, and you watch it, you hear it, and it's like, it's just too much. It's not a book. You know, in a book, The Fabric of the Cosmos, or The Elegant Universe, you can flip back, you can go forward, you can rethink, you can take a moment off. That's not really how you watch a television show, and I think that's really the difference between the two.
I'd say that dynamic situation is always present. You said, I think there was no scene that didn't have that battle so much going on in it. And, you know, our job is to sort of make compelling stories, and I find that if you cut the scene together, it will tell you whether you've got the right amount of science in there. If there's too much science in it, it stops being a story and it starts being a kind of a lecture. And if there's not enough science, people feel that they're being cheated. And so, you know, we're constantly looking for that balance that you're talking about. And I think, you know, for the most part, we achieve it in these scenes. So, another question, and then maybe we'll look at the multiverse clip.
Hi, Dr. Greene. This is kind of a controversial opinion to have at Comic-Con, but you'll always be my favorite time-traveling doctor. Anyway, what do you see as sort of the responsibility of science education in maybe the future? Because as like a celebrity New York scientist on PBS, you do kind of stand on the shoulders of giants. And what are your hopes to accomplish with this in kind of the future of like public science education?
Well, I think you're absolutely right on the front of the absolute vital nature of science to our future collectively. I mean, when you look across the board at the opportunities that we have going forward and the challenges that we face, right? From all the things that we know and hear about with climate change and genetic modification and nanotechnology, nuclear proliferation and space travel, manned space travel. I mean, the opportunities are spectacular, and almost all of them require two things. They require an understanding of the basic science, but also a public that's excited about the science, because ultimately these are expensive undertakings. And if you don't have a general public that's excited and informed about the science, they can't participate in the decision making. So maybe it sounds overly dramatic, but I think the health and future of democracy relies upon having a general public that at least has a willingness to grapple with some of the basic ideas of science. And this program is one of many ways in which I hope that we can help make inroads to make that possible. I mean, you may also be familiar with this other thing that we do in New York called the World Science Festival. It too has the same goal. It takes a different approach, different medium, live programming, but the idea is to show people that the stories of science are so dramatic and so exciting that it's not like the science that you typically learn in the classroom, not always, but typically that makes your head hurt. These ideas are opening up worlds, universes to people, and if they're presented in a way that's interesting and compelling, it's not work, it's fun, and it's something that really opens up the future to us all. So I think that is the goal.
Thanks a lot.
Multiverse clip without an intro, because I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Okay, sure.
So let's run that.
New York City. They say there's nowhere else like it. Home to 8 million people. Countless structures, monuments, and landmarks. Every one of them unique. Or so we think. Uniqueness is an idea so familiar we never even question it. Experience tells us people and objects are one of a kind. Why else would we visit museums and collect great masterpieces? Yet, a new picture of the cosmos is coming to light in which nothing is unique. Not that the world's great masterpieces are fakes. Instead, I'm talking about something far more profound. A new picture of the cosmos that challenges the very notion of uniqueness. One in which duplicates are inevitable. And that's just the beginning. There might be duplicates not just of objects, but of you and me.
Trees growing.
Everyone else. But if this new picture is right, where are these duplicates and why haven't we ever seen them?
Atoms
The
keep
answer
maintaining
may lie
space.
outside our universe. There was a time when the word universe meant all there is, everything. The notion of more than one universe, more than one everything, seemed impossible. But perhaps, if we could go beyond our solar system, beyond the Milky Way, even beyond other distant galaxies, past the end of the observable universe, we'll find that there's more, a lot more, that our universe is not alone. There may be other universes. In fact, there might be new ones being born all the time. So, what would it be like if we could travel to some of these other universes? What would we see? Some might be vastly different from our own, with properties unlike anything we've ever seen. In fact, some universes in the multiverse might not have light or matter or anything recognizable at all. And there might be other universes with features not unlike the familiar ones we know, but where life takes a completely different form, perhaps communicating in ways we'd find utterly bizarre. And the math shows that if we were able to visit enough of these universes, we might eventually find ones like ours, with a Milky Way galaxy, a solar system, and an Earth. Except with some slight differences. In one, maybe the asteroid that killed off the dinosaurs 65 million years ago missed. And evolution charted a new course. In another, there might be an Earth with people similar to us, but better at multitasking. But there's something even stranger. Somewhere out there, we should find exact copies of our universe with duplicates of everything and everyone.
Multiplicities of morphic fields.
So I think we'll start just with the question that was asked about the multiverse early on, which was, what are the various kinds of multiverses and which ones do I think are most likely and which do we cover in the show? And just to make an interesting and rich subject short answer, there are about 9 different versions of the multiverse that have been proposed throughout the last, 50 or 60 years. And these range from the quantum mechanical multiverse to multiverses that come from simulations on computers, to versions that arise from various ways of thinking about the elementary particles of nature. Those are covered in my most recent book that some of you may be familiar with called The Hidden Reality. But in this show, we only focus on one particular version of the multiverse. And that's the version that comes from inflationary cosmology. This idea that in the early moments of the universe, space underwent a fantastically rapid expansion. And what we find from the scientific perspective is that rapid ballooning of space may not have been a unique event. There may have been many versions of that, many big bangs, if you will, happening at various and far-flung places throughout a much wider cosmos. Each one of those ballooning expanses would be one of those spheres that you saw in the clips that we just saw. Each one of them would be a universe unto itself. And our universe would therefore be one bubble, if you will, in this big cosmic bubble bath of other universes. So that's the version that we explore in the 4th show of Fabric of the Cosmos. That's the answer to whoever asked that question early on. Great. So you can move on to this other question.
It's kind of a similar question, but I'd heard once in, I think it was a fiction book or science fiction or something like that, that there's this idea that every decision that we make would spawn into its own separate universe,
yes,
which would be the opposite decision of what we ourselves made.
Right.
Do you think that's actually a legit possibility? Or?
Well, that is most properly described in terms of the quantum mechanical multiverse, called the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which arises in quantum theory, and we do briefly discuss that in the quantum program, not in the multiverse program. But that comes from the recognition that quantum theory tells us that the best you can ever do in any experiment is say predict that there's a 50% chance of this or a 50% chance of that. And you can't do any better according to quantum mechanics. Now when you do the measurement, you always find one result or the other. So the deep question is, what happened to the other possibility? If you find one, is the other, does it evaporate? Was it never really there? One of the possible approaches to resolving that puzzle is that both outcomes happen. They just happen in separate universes. In one universe, you find it here. In another universe, you find the particle there. And if you take that idea to its logical conclusion, it starts to sound exactly like what you were describing. Because when you decided to get out of your chair just now, that was just some particles in your brain moving in one direction or another. Now, had they moved in the other possible direction, you may not have gotten out of your seat. You'd still be sitting there. And that, in this way of thinking about things, would be happening just in a different universe, a universe parallel to ours. The one footnote I will say that we don't actually describe in the programs, there is belief among some scientists right now that the multiverse that we cover, with all these different universes coming from these different big bangs, may be absolutely identical to the multiverse that comes from quantum mechanics. In a very non-obvious way, each of those universes may be realizing each of the possible outcomes from quantum consideration. So they may be the same.
Okay. One other quick.
Sure.
Can I get your autograph after this?
In this universe, absolutely.
One more quick question on the multiverse.
Hi, my name is Brooke Guthrie, and I'm a vegan chef. And what really interests me, thank you. What really interests
I mean, you know I'm vegan, right? Do you know that or not?
No, I didn't.
I'm vegan, yeah.
Oh, fabulous.
There you go. Yeah.
Vegans rock.
Yeah. Now my wife at the back, she's rolling her eyes right now because she hates this whole vegan thing.
That's okay. She can come on board later. What really interests me, because I'm always teaching people about food and nutrition and how what we eat affects our body. But what I'm interested in about what you do and how you study in this multiverse universe, and I'm not a scientist, would there be a core main character that says we eat this food? Or how, number one, how would we consume food from your point of view in the future? And number two, the food that the central character eats, how would it affect the other replicas of this person? And three, if there is mutation, say someone is supposed to get sick, would they have one sick version of themselves, and would it affect how the rest of the other duplicates of that person functions?
Yeah, so starting with the last question, absolutely it would be the case if these ideas are correct, that there would be a version of me experiencing any possible evolution, including getting sick, in one particular thread of this multiverse, assuming, for instance, that the quantum version and this one that we describe here are the same, and there would be another me that does not experience that particular outcome. Basically, anything that's compatible with the laws of physics can happen in these scenarios, and that is a wide berth. That's a wide spectrum of possibilities. In fact, I was giving a talk on this kind of stuff a few months ago when I was on a book tour, and there's this little sort of elderly woman in the front row who piped up and said, well, does that mean that Sarah Palin is president in one of these multiverses? To which I had to really emphasize to her, it must be compatible with the laws of physics. But food more generally, to my mind, to the mind of a physicist, is just some configuration of particles. Some configuration that takes the form of one kind of object or another. So we consider food to just be just like people, just like any other inanimate object, any animate object. It's just a configuration of particles. So we don't treat it in any special way. Which again, some people do come up to me and I don't really know what the answer to this is. They say, well, why are you vegan? Because it's just like the particles are arranged in one form or another, right? I mean, what could it possibly matter to you whether they're arranged like this or that? Why would you eat one arrangement of particles, but you will eat another arrangement of particles? And I've never really come to an answer to that. It's just, maybe it's the one inconsistency in how I live. But yeah, so that's, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of how we think about it.
I'd like to just make a couple of closing comments, and then we'll show one more clip and be done with today. What is Space is on the 2nd of November. The Illusion of Time is on the 9th. Quantum Leap is on the 16th of November. And Universe or Multiverse is on the 23rd. Please watch and have your friends watch too. I'd like to thank the audience today for all the great questions. You deserve a round of applause. I'd also like to thank Brian for being here today.
Oh yeah, so the final clip is from the Space, from the first program, right? And the clip we're going to show you comes from the very end of the program, where we get into a very odd idea that many of you may have heard of, which is the possibility that everything we see in this world around us may actually be a kind of holographic projection of more fundamental laws and processes that take place on a distant surface that surrounds us. A surface that is very thin, and therefore you can think of it sort of like a hologram. What is a hologram? You have a thin piece of plastic, and when you illuminate it, it creates a realistic three-dimensional image. The idea that comes from black hole physics, as briefly alluded to in the scene that you're about to look at, is that that may be the case for the reality around us. That there truly may be laws of physics existing in some surface at the edge of the universe, and we are the holographic projection of those laws. So let's take a quick look at this final clip. As we examine the fabric of the cosmos ever more closely, we may well find far more surprises than anyone ever imagined. Take me, for example. I seem real enough, don't I? Well, yes. But surprising new clues are emerging that everything, you and I, and even space itself, may actually be a kind of hologram. That is, everything we see and experience, everything we call our familiar three-dimensional reality, may be a projection of information that's stored on a thin, distant, two-dimensional surface. Sort of the way the information for this hologram is stored on this thin piece of plastic. Now, holograms are something we're all familiar with, from the security symbol you find on most credit cards.
That's right.
But the universe is a hologram? That's one of the most drastic revisions to our picture of space and reality ever proposed. And the evidence for it comes from some of the strangest realms of space, black holes.
This is a real disconnect, and it's very hard to get your head around. Modern ideas coming from black holes tell us that reality is two-dimensional, that the three-dimensional world, the full-bodied three-dimensional world, is a kind of image of a hologram on the boundary of the region of space. This is a very strange thing. When I was a younger physicist, I would have thought any physicist who said that was absolutely crazy.
Here's a way to think about this. Imagine I took my wallet and threw it into a black hole. What would happen? We used to think that since nothing, not even light, can escape the immense gravity of a black hole, my wallet would be lost forever. But it now seems that may not be the whole story. Recently, scientists exploring the math describing black holes made a curious discovery. Even as my wallet disappears into the black hole, a copy of all the information it contains seems to get smeared out and stored on the surface of the black hole, in much the same way that information is stored in a computer.
Sure.
So, in the end, my wallet exists in two places. There's a three-dimensional version that's lost forever inside the black hole, and a two-dimensional version that remains on the surface as information.
The information content of all the stuff that fell into that black hole can be expressed entirely in terms of just the outside of the black hole.
Outside reflects inside.
The idea then is that you can capture what's going on inside the black hole by referring only to the outside.
And in theory, I could use the information on the outside of the black hole to reconstruct my wallet. And here's the truly mind-blowing part. Space within a black hole plays by the same rules as space outside a black hole or anywhere else. So if an object inside a black hole can be described by information on the black hole surface, then it might be that everything in the universe, from galaxies and stars to you and me, even space itself, is just a projection of information stored on some distant, two-dimensional surface that surrounds us. In other words, what we experience as reality may be something like a hologram.
Is the three-dimensional world an illusion in the same sense that a hologram is an illusion? Perhaps. I'm inclined to think yes, that the three-dimensional world is a kind of illusion, and that the ultimate precise reality is the two-dimensional reality at the surface of the universe.
This idea is so new that physicists are still struggling to understand it. But if it's right, just as Newton and Einstein completely changed our picture of space, we may be on the verge of an even more dramatic revolution.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.